Meet Reid Lance Rosenthal, rancher, #1 best-selling award-winning author, and unabashedly, unapologetically on the right side of the outstanding issues of our generation. But don't try to fence him in. Sometimes his positions will surprise you, because Reid is definitely his own man, with his own opinions. You might love him, you might hate him, but you won't be able to stop listening. Step over to the right side with Reid.
Howdy folks, this is Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio, broadcasting to you at 6:50 a.m. KGAB and the Town Square Network serving the Intermountain West. KFEZ Colorado Springs serving northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, and 780 a.m. The Monster in Denver. Hello Nebraska, Utah, Colorado, Montana, Wyoming. Today we're going to talk about solutions. You know, for the past 6 months, I've brought you lots of national interviews, from CIA operatives on Islamic Jihad to international economists on international economies or domestic economies, to specialists on ideology and political, shall we say, swanky-hanky. We've talked about the debt, we've talked about the deficit, we've talked a little bit about education. There'll be shows just on education coming in the future per the request of many of you listeners out there. But today we're going to talk about solutions, because solutions are a big thing. And you know, it's really kind of come home to me. I'm finishing up the third novel in the 16-book series Threads West, an American Saga. In fact, just won 3 more awards for the series in the last week, and I'm humbled and I'm proud. That's 13 big national awards for the series in just 2 years. Best historical fiction, or finalist, I might say. The winner's going to be chosen in New York, May 29th, from the Independent Book Publishers Association. Best Western of 2012 from USA Book Review. Best Design from the Indies. And a silver medal, runner-up, for the Best Regional Fiction, West Mountain Region. And that's from the IPPEs. All big, kind of big deals. So thank you, readers, and thank you, judges, and thanks to everybody. And you know, this third book, as I look at these characters, these brave men, these independent women, all different faiths, cultures, creeds. You know, there's an elderly black couple setting their life sails for the winds of freedom. There's an Ogallala Sioux family knowing something ominous is happening, knowing the landscape of their lives in the West is changing, but not quite able to come to the realization, to the reality. The European immigrants, men and women, different faiths, different social backgrounds, different financial backgrounds, some good, some bad. And in the third book, you know, in the second book, they come to Cherry Creek, pre-Denver 1855. The first book, fate kind of twists them together from Norway, Denmark, England, Ireland, the Americas, the West. There's a mountain man character that many people just love, Zebediah Taylor. And fate twists these people together. You know, they come from separate origins, separate lives, have separate ambitions, separate motivations. Some are running from the law, some are carrying on family honor. Others have no choice but to immigrate to America. Others eagerly immigrate. But fate twists them together and they head west to Cherry Creek, which is book 2. And a long, arduous journey across the western United States, filled with pathos, filled with triumph, filled with love and passion. And you know, the overriding theme, and I've noticed it as I'm finishing up book 3, which will be coming out in about a month, Uncompahgre, where water turns rock red, and already started on book 4, Moccasin Tracks. And those are set in the Uncompahgre, you know, Colorado. At that time, the western end of the Kansas territories. But these people were self-reliant. They were tough. They were strong. They had a dream. They had incentive. They didn't have a government standing in their way. They didn't have morons making decisions that you wouldn't make in your own household, much less for a country of 350 million. And when there was a problem, they solved it. They stepped up. They used common sense. And they solved it. Or they died. Or some other terrible fate would befall them. You know, if you want a hand, you look at the end of your arm. that individualistic, self-reliant trait that Americans have been known for. And, somehow it's changed. Now that hand at the end of the arm is gimme, 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 at least for a large portion of the population. Some fundamental changes. And those fundamental changes, I think, are going to get into, or should we say lead us into the solutions. Because, in my world, the most complex problem has the simplest solution. It always seems to be so. You don't have to scratch your head. You don't have to write 2,700-page bills that nobody reads. You don't have to do any of that stuff. By the way, the books are available on pre-order right now, Barnes & Noble and Amazon. This is the day before Mother's Day. I think Barnes & Noble might have a special going on, 15% off. And they have the books marked down for release anyway, so by all means, I think you'll like them. Of course, I'm biased. But grab yourself a pre-order. Get on the list because the reservations are very, very strong, and I'm not sure, to be honest with you, we have enough books in the first printing. Let's go to solutions, because it all ties into the American spirit. It ties in what our ancestors learned and what we have forgotten to apply. Let's agree on the problems. We've talked about them. You can go back in the archives. You can listen to debt deficit shows. You can listen to spending shows, quantitative easing, currency collapse, shall we say overreaching by the executive branch through executive orders, failure of Congress to get things done, lack of leadership, you name it. I think everybody can agree on the problems: unemployment, size of government, spending, debt and deficits, defense, foreign relations, how we handle or ignore or try and ignore Islamic Jihad. Did you guys see these Benghazi hearings? How many times does somebody have to lie to you before you know they're a liar? It doesn't take me long. We've had all sorts of promises. We're going to talk about that in the show too, because it's an important ingredient in reaching solutions. We have immigration as a problem. We have the Middle East. We have global policy. We have globalists who want to subordinate our American sovereignty to global rule and the United Nations, which limits our individual freedoms, which are also under attack domestically. And if you take all these problems, they're all interrelated. If you solve one, you start solving the others. It's like nothing really works independently. So here's my thought. I think that the causes of these problems can be really narrowed down to 4 basic ingredients. The first is money. This system is awash with money. Campaigns are awash with money. It corrupts. It allows for influence peddling. It allows for influence purchase. And it cuts out most of the electorate from decisions, and it cuts out your voice. Your voice is not heard. The second is power and control. You guys have all seen this in your family and your friends and your coworkers. Somebody gets power and control, they want more power and control. It's just human nature. Nobody's ever satisfied. They can't have enough money. They can't have enough money to spend, particularly if it's somebody else's. They can't have enough power. They can't have enough control. The third problem is misinformation. And misinformation means flat out lying, falsifying, or omitting critical information that an informed electorate needs to know. I think the biggest enemies of this country right now are most of the mainstream media. They refuse to bring you news. They refuse to bring you stories. And the omission of a story is the same as, in journalistic terms, telling the story wrong. And they do that plenty of times too. I'll never forget a class, one of my first classes. I'm an old journalism major at Colorado State University. It was called Story Construction. And our professor gave us 5 facts and said, I want the reader to come away with 3 different impressions. Write this story 3 different ways. I never forgot that. Using the same facts, how you could influence a reader's judgment. how you could subliminally and, shall we say, with subterfuge, direct the reader's conclusion. And you see that happening in the press all the time right now. It's one of the reasons I do this show, the story behind the story. Unfettered facts, which you're welcome to check out. And all the news that imports your life, not just selected tidbits that further an ideology. And there's, when you have misinformation and people are lying to you, when they look in the eye and say your taxes aren't going to go up, not one dime, and they go up. When they tell you that your health insurance premiums are going to go down by $2,500 and they double instead. When they tell you that this bill will cover all folks who aren't covered for health insurance, and you find out from the government itself that it's not going to cover 30 million. When they say it's going to cost $900 billion and it winds up costing $2.7 trillion. When they tell you that they've reduced spending when in fact, and we're going to be talking about this during the course of this show, spending continues to go up. The reduction is a paltry reduction in the rise or the rate of increase of spending. And when they tell you that a video caused the deaths of 4 Americans in Benghazi, and in hearings it comes out that there was no video, there was no demonstration. There was just somebody asleep purposefully or negligently at the switch. After a while, it kind of adds up, and it undermines your faith and trust in the government, in the country, in the process, and undermines America as a representative republic. The fourth problem is education and indoctrination. We've touched on that, in previous shows. The last 2 or 3 weeks we've talked about it pretty extensively, and I plan to have shows focused just on education. I gave you a quote. It was 1 or 2 shows ago. You can go to the archives on the right side, radio.com. While I'm at it, the book website is threadswestseries.com. That's threadswestseries.com. The publisher's done a super job. Great description of this tale of us. It is our story. 170 years of history through these fictional characters' eyes. And you'll recognize these characters. They're your workers, your co-workers, your family, and your friends. I digress. I gave you a quote in that education show. I gave you 3 quotes that had come out in a week from high-ranking officials in this government. Hillary Clinton, some moron Democratic talking head and announcer on MSNBC, and Barack Obama and Joe Biden. You remember the whole furor about, your kids really aren't yours. They belong to the collective. Remember Hitler's quote in 1934. I gave it to you. Let me paraphrase it. We don't care what you think because we already own your children. Education is a huge problem, and it feeds into the other 3 problems. Let's get started here with solutions. We all know what the problems are. If money is a problem, I suggest we attack that first. How about campaign reform? I'm not, throughout this Weinstein, Feinstein, whatever bill, what a bunch of nonsense. How about real simple, 50 pages, $5,000 maximum campaign contribution to any campaign by any individual or entity, period. No ifs, and buts, or ors. 20 years in jail if you break the law. No forming subsidiary companies in other states and LLCs. If you're under the control or common control of an entity, you can't spiderweb out so a whole bunch of entities that you've created give $5,000 each. It's $5,000, period. Whether you're a corporation, a union, or an individual. And let's limit the amount of money that any type of campaign can spend. How about $250 million for the presidential race? They're spending billions. I mean, you're setting up a situation where people can be bought and paid for. And with $250 million, you're going to have to focus on getting out your message. What are you going to do? What do you believe? What do you stand for? What aren't you going to do? Because you're not going to have all that extra money to sling mud and diversionary ads at your opponent. People will actually get to choose a candidate on the merits. Imagine that. Along with this, we need a constitutional amendment, a term limit amendment, 2 terms for senators, 3 or 4 terms for congressmen. They're 2 years each. We need to stop this 30, 40-year entrenched bureaucracy that we have in Washington. Once again, rife, absolutely perfect. We're setting ourselves up for failure and corruption. We're setting ourselves up for the ears of special interests rather than our own collective voice as the citizens of this country. And the third thing is, if Congress passes a law or the president signs a law or an executive order, they are bound by the law. None of this exemption crap. You heard about the Democrats trying to weasel through a bill several weeks ago to exempt members of Congress, their staffs, and the administration from Obamacare. This is not a treat. This is what they tried to do. Nonsense. You passed it, you live with it, just like the rest of us. Maybe you'll think twice about passing things in the future. Let's talk about the debt and deficit. There's 2 ways to get a budget under control. You all know this from your households. You can lower expenses, or you can raise revenues, or you can do both. I'm suggesting we do both. But not with these Band-Aid approaches for political purposes, using class warfare to extract a paltry $10 billion here and $10 billion there from people you don't like because it's a popular notion. That solves nothing. All that does is lessen employment, lessen investment. It does nothing. We need a complete overhaul of this tax code. Right now we have close to 80,000 pages of tax code. Nobody can know it all. It's impossible. And we have loopholes. It's like a rowboat that you drilled 1,000 holes in. All that needs to go away. We can have a tax code that's literally 200 pages. That's it. Real simple. I call it the skin in the game tax code. If you want to be fair, Mr. Obama, fair, fair, fair. Social justice. You want to be fair? Everybody pays. There's no exceptions. If you breathe the air, you walk the streets, and you're protected by the army, you have to have skin in the game. If you're living just on welfare, you write a $50 check every year. If your income's $15,000 and you're a student, $100 a year, whatever the number is, you have skin in the game. There are no exceptions whatsoever. And the rest of us who are making decent livings or trying to make decent livings, we're on a flat tax. Maybe there's 3 rates, maybe there's 4, 10%, 15%, 20%, 25%. And they break in at certain levels of income. And that's the tax. And all these deductions and nonsense, except for 3, go away. And those 3 are, you get a tax credit for buying and investing in equipment. That grows businesses. That creates jobs. That propels manufacturing in this country. Maybe you could even go one step further and say the tax break's only for American-made products. Start fighting back a little bit against China. Another topic I hope we have time to get to today. International. And along with this tax code, the flat tax, you drop the corporate tax rate to 15%. Right now at 35%, we are either the number 1 or number 2 most highly taxed corporate tax in the world. Now, tell me, if you're a German and you want to invest in a country, build a plant, and hire people, are you going to do it in Ireland with a 13% rate? Or are you going to do it in the United States with a 35% rate? This is pretty easy, isn't it? We will attract huge amounts of investment. We will see a boom in terms of manufacturing, which everybody wrings their hands on. They're so concerned about manufacturing, but they don't do squat to get it going again. We'll see a boom in all those sectors, as not only American countries reinvest, but foreign companies move here to invest. because the tax climate is favorable. We operate on a global basis now. We're competing with 180 other countries. We have many advantages, but many of them have advantages too. We need to level that playing field. Along those lines, most experts think there's $3 trillion parked offshore. These are corporations that don't want to bring the money home because they get taxed at 35%. How about a 1 year or 2 year holiday? 5% tax on any money that's repatriated, and a tax credit against the tax if you use that money, a certain percentage. I'm not going to get down in the weeds here. A certain percentage to hire people at jobs with longevity. You can't hire somebody for 3 months, get a tax credit, and let them go. There has to be a minimum time period, 3 years, whatever it happens to be. You'd see an unbelievable employment boom. The government says stimulus, stimulus, stimulus. How's $3 trillion for a stimulus? Not only that, you increase the amount of revenue being raised through your new flat tax, thereby getting the debt down, eliminating the annual deficit, and beginning to work on the real gorilla in the room, unfunded liabilities. Remember, deficit is the amount that you're short each year. Since we haven't had a budget, I can't say short against the budget. So, the amount you're short against revenues, $1 trillion plus a year for the last 5 years, since Mr. Obama took office. And all of you who are wagging your head saying, oh, Bush spent $3 trillion on the wars and that's where it all started. Here's the facts, Jack. President Bush's budget deficit in 2008, before he left office, was $462 billion. The next year, under Obama, it went to 1.3, almost 1.4 trillion. Do you know why that was? It's a stimulus bill. Here's another problem that needs to be solved if we're going to get debt and deficit and unfunded liabilities under control. But do you understand the difference between a zero-based budget and a baseline budget? The United States government operates on a baseline budget. That $1 trillion, I'm rounding numbers, stimulus that Obama pushed through and that the morons in Congress approved in 2009, that wasn't 1 year, folks. That's forever the way the government spending and budgeting process works. Because you raised the baseline by $1 trillion, and that becomes the new baseline off which all subsequent budgets are done. That's why we jumped from spending, I'm rounding numbers, $2.5 trillion a year, including the wars, to $3.5 trillion a year now, with the wars winding down. And cooked into those books are annual increases. The reduction in those annual increases from 8 plus or minus percent to 6 plus or minus percent on top of the $1 trillion increase in baseline budgeting, this is what these guys lie to us about, saying that they've cut spending. Wrong. As you streamline these various departments, get rid of the Commerce Department, get rid of the Education Department, they do nothing. They are a total waste of $150 billion a year. You place a freeze on federal hiring. You don't fire people. But as people retire, as people leave the federal job pool, they're not replaced. You allow attrition to dwindle the government at the same time as you cut unnecessary departments, waste, and fraud. Just think about what you could save in administrative costs on taxes implementing the flat tax with a 200-page, give or take, tax law rather than an 80,000-page tax law. Right now, I think the figures I saw is $80 billion plus that the IRS spends running after everybody with taxes. You could cut that by 75 or 80%. 40, 50, $60 billion a year savings just in that one department with a system that functions better, that raises more revenue. Do you see how all this works hand in glove? At the same time, you have to go after these entitlements. I'm not talking about changing entitlements for existing seniors. They paid in, they expected it, they get it. I'm talking about entitlements for those who are up and coming. Increase the retirement age. Give some flexibility in terms of private investment. In other words, you can do Social Security or you can do X. This child tax credit, in previous shows, go in the archives and listen. I mean, there's documented cases of people having kids, getting the tax credit, which they get forever, and then sending the kids back to Mexico or sending the kids back to Asia, wherever they came from. Some people are collecting for as many as 12 kids, $1,000 a month. Your money. We're all aware of the spending that goes on in this government. $500,000 to study the orgasmic effects of duck genitalia. $1 million to study the speed at which snails crawl. Let me ask a question. If somebody came to your door and knocked on the door and said, listen, I got this great proposition for you. If you give me your tax check, $15,000, or 10, or 5, or 20, whatever you pay, I'm going to make sure it's directed at only one government program, and that is how fast snails crawl. Would you write them the check? Would you? Of course not. But guess what? You are writing the check to study how fast snails crawl. Senator Coburn from Oklahoma, and you can go right on his website and read it, has done a study each of the last, I believe, 5 years. He's identified in each study, give or take, $200 billion per year that is wasted on crap like this. Not a thing has been done by Congress or this administration to implement the elimination of this waste, fraud, duplication, and abuse. The GAO came out with a report. It's some of the previous shows. $67 billion, separate from Coburn, that they identified is just as nonsensical. I mean, giving money to Sweden to build cars when we're trying to build up our manufacturing base? Really? 100 some odd million? Loaning $2 billion to Venezuela and Brazil to drill for oil offshore? Really? $250 million to the Muslim Brotherhood? Really? This is what you want your money going for, guys? And girls? Huh? Really? I don't think so. So let's to begin with, we got these revenues coming up from the new taxes. We got expenses going down through government attrition and wrapping up some worthless departments. Now, let's work on the waste. You can't tell me you can't get a bill passed to implement every single one of Coburn's recommendations and the GAO's recommendations, thereby saving $250 billion a year. Nothing's been done since Obama came into office on these matters. And some of them, quite frankly, began before his time. But he's the guy who promised to clean it up. Remember, I'm going to have the deficit by my third year. That's his promise. Well, how about saving $250 million a year? Do you realize that that's 3 times the sequester that everybody falsely wrung their hands over? So you can see the cumulative effect. And on welfare and disability, you're not looking for a job, you don't get your welfare check. End of story. Disability? How about 3 doctors having to attest to your disability? I don't know about you, but I'm not real keen on, I don't mind supporting people who really need it, but I'm not real keen on sending $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month disability checks to guys who go out and play golf and go down to the club and work out. And gals. No, that just doesn't make me jump up and down. That's like the guy coming to the door and saying, give me 15 grand so I can study how fast snails crawl. Huge waste. Obamacare. You know, there's no doubt This is 1/6, actually closer to 1/5 of the economy, healthcare. All sorts of promises were made to us. They were known to be false when they were made, and they're proving false now. The cost was to be $900 billion. It's now at $2.7 trillion. Go look at the CBO. They're only giving you 9 years of cost when they say $1.8 trillion. Look at year 2022, $265 billion a year. Multiply it by 10, $2.7 trillion. 200% overrun over what was told us. We were told that we need to do it so that everybody could be covered. Now we learned 30 million people aren't going to be covered. We were told we could keep our doctor and keep our policy. Now the IRS does a study saying 7 to 9 million of us will lose our policy and our doctors. I mean, how often does somebody have to lie to you before you know they're a liar? But in healthcare, it's real simple, folks. We can have all the goodies. You know, somebody can stay on the parent's health policy to the age 26. People with pre-existing conditions can be covered. We can insure many, probably not all, but more than the current system, Obamacare will do. Many of the uninsured. Just by savings within the current system, we don't need 2,700 pages of nonsense. And we can save 2.7 plus or minus trillion dollars, which again helps debt, deficit, and unfunded liabilities. How do we do it? We do all the things that aren't in that 2,700 page bill. Number one, we allow competition across state lines for insurance companies. Nothing like a little competition to drive down rates. Number two, we stop the smelly deal that Obama did. Go back and listen to my interview with Scott Tibbs from the National Health Federation a month or two ago. The smelly deal that Obama did with the pharmaceuticals to get their support for Obamacare. $80 billion a year it's costing us, you and me, because we have to buy drugs from the big drug companies, not generics. Tort reform. Malpractice. Do you understand that the average doctor, and it can vary depending upon whether you're a surgeon or you're not, spends over $300,000 a year in malpractice insurance? The two states which have undertaken tort reform, Mississippi and Texas, have seen those rates drop because of their laws limiting doctor liability to $100,000. You know who's paying the $300,000, right, folks? You are. It's another see how fast the snail can move deal. This is so a bunch of attorneys can get rich. Goes back to the money problem. Just think about how much clout the American Trial Lawyers Association would have if they could only give $5,000 instead of raising millions. Maybe our voices would start to be heard. We need to set up a fraud panel. Really good attorneys, really good forensic accountants, people who know the Medicare and Medicaid system inside and out, people who know how to jive the system. And they need to weed out the estimated $200 billion a year in fraud, waste, duplication, and improper claims. And I don't mean a bunch of political appointees. I mean blue ribbon. Do you know what the savings are of all that stuff? Close to $400 billion a year. Total it up. $200 billion in waste and fraud, which everybody talks about and nobody does anything about. $80 billion in pharmaceuticals. An estimated $50 to $80 billion in tort reform. And on top of that, an expected decrease in premiums, real decrease in premiums, not the nonsense we've been fed, through competition by insurance companies across state lines. So you got $400 billion. What can you do with that? Let's see. Let's scratch our heads. How about this? Use the savings from the system itself without ruining people's health care, them losing their doctors and paying more for premiums, losing their insurance companies, etc. Use that $400 billion to cover the uninsured, to create a special pool of high-risk folks, pre-existing condition folks, to cover kids if they want to live in mama's basement until the age of 26, all the goodies that you've heard about. You don't need Obamacare for the goodies. You don't need to break the bank for the goodies. The other thing we need to do is we need to get rid of Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank is costing you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a year if you have any finance going whatsoever, including home finance. Lots of little banks around the country are struggling. They've had to add 2 or 3 compliance officers. Who do you think pays their salaries, folks? You do. Increase fees, 0.1% on interest, whatever it happens to be. None of this stuff is free. Dodd-Frank does nothing but make the playing field unlevel for smaller community banks, which are the lifeblood of small business. Try going to Wells Fargo for your small business loan. Good luck. And if you get it, you better hope they don't pull the rug out from under you a year later just because the manager changed or the policies changed or some new regulation came out in Dodd-Frank. Getting rid of Dodd-Frank will stimulate business, stimulate employment, increase revenues to the Treasury, decrease debt. You understand that the national debt of $17 trillion is just a fraction of what the full faith and credit of the United States backs, which is closer to $100 trillion. I did a whole show on this. There's a chart. You should really listen to it. Take a look at that chart. If we follow the steady course, we don't have $1 trillion annual deficit, folks. It's closer to $5 trillion. Because that $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and pensions, increases each year with the CPI. If the CPI goes up 3%, we just added $3 trillion to our liabilities. If you follow that chart out and we don't do anything about it, it's $177 trillion. Imagine you're having a kid, little Johnny or little Sally. Welcome to the world, kid. Here's your bill for $700,000. That's what you owe. Just divide $177 trillion by 350 million folks. See what number you come up with. Here's your bill, kid. Have a great life. There's only one source for all this, folks. It's our pockets and our property. The government is us, even though the government forgets it when convenient, which seems to be almost all the time recently. The EPA. The EPA is a scourge of business. It's a scourge of investment. It slows the process down. There was a study that was done just a few years ago. And that study said that we spend somewhere between $40 and $60 billion a year in terms of man hours complying with regulations. And right now, listen to my previous shows, regulations are being added at the rate of 5,000 to 6,000 a year. That's triple, quadruple previous rates. The EPA, if they propose a rule or regulation, and it's going to cost the economy all in, people's time, compliance, you name it, retooling by industries, more than $100 million, it needs to be approved by Congress. No Lone Ranger stuff out there. No more administrative regulation trying to circumvent Congress and the Constitution out there, to the detriment of the common folks, the middle class, business owners, and the basic integrity of the United States economy. That has to end. And all this stuff does what? It creates employment opportunities. It creates new businesses. It gets unemployment down. You understand, this is another lie. I've talked about it in the past, but I'm going to just review it with you again. You understand that our real unemployment rate is not 7.5%. It's 13.9%, folks. 13.9%. Now, you can go on realstatistics.com and you can take a look at all this stuff. But number one, you have the underemployed. That's people who want a full-time job, but they can only get part-time. Number two, you have the partially employed. They're just working part-time even though they're physically capable of working full-time. And then you have people leaving the workforce. If you add up those three categories of people 885,000, 1.5 million, and 7.9 million, respectively. That's over 10 million people, and that brings your real unemployment rate to 13.9%. You want to get that unemployment rate down? You want to get the unemployment rate down, which is even higher than that for blacks, higher than that for minorities in inner cities, higher than that for youth coming out of college? Then you better create jobs. And all the things I've talked about so far create jobs, including controlling the power, control, and money aspect. Because big business and big unions and big special interests, if they can pay whatever they want to pay to a candidate, they can buy them. And trust me, the big boys want a lot fewer of the little boys because it gives the big boys a bigger pie. Let's go to immigration. Immigration is a problem. Now, despite the lies that Janet Neapolitano, she just unbelievable. Despite the lies that she tries to feed us, that border crossings are down and the border's never been nonsense. Border crossings are up 300% since January. People trying to get in under what they perceive to be the amnesty wire. We need to seal that border. That is step number one. Because every time we do an amnesty, every time we give a path to citizenship, we simply attract a greater flood of immigrants across the border. And all of them are living off these other services which are completely out of control. I told you in previous shows about the Mexican consulates giving out flyers to Mexicans who are illegally crossing the border, telling them how to get food stamps. That has to stop. So you seal the border, the 11 million or 12 million, whatever it is, in terms of illegal immigrants now in the country. Sorry, I'm not going to use the non-documented workers. Enough of this PC crap. They broke the law. They are illegal aliens. Some of them may have the best of intents. They want to provide for their family. They want better opportunity. Good for them. That doesn't change the fact they broke the law. But obviously, we can't ship them all back home. That's impossible. So they do need a path to citizenship. And in my mind, once again, complex problem, simple solution. Number one, it's going to take you 10 years to become a citizen. Number two, if in the 10 years you don't pay taxes, you don't work, or you commit a crime, your butt is out of here and you're never coming back because the borders are sealed. Now, if you're a good citizen, you play by the rules, you're a productive member of the American society, you are trained. By the third year, you have to be proficient in 8th grade English, 8th grade American civics, and 8th grade American history. By the 6th year, 10th grade English, civics, American history. And by the 10th year, you have to be proficient as if you were graduating from an American high school in those 3 subjects. And if you are, you can do your citizenship test, you can pay whatever fines Congress comes up with, whatever they have going. I'm not going to get down the weeds. And welcome to America. We're happy to have you as a new resident, a new citizen. And I think if you do that, you'll weed out the bad apples. And you'll actually have the fabric of an immigrant community without hurting people who have tried to live by the rules and who are in waiting lines to immigrate here. But you'll have an immigrant community which will contribute greatly to the United States and will be part of the United States. They will be, in every sense of the word, Americans. Isn't that what it's all about? I mean, if you want to be a Mexican or you want to be a Chinese or you want to be a Martian and all you want is United States citizenship so you can get all the bennies, see you later, Joe. We don't need you. We don't want you. And this will weed them out. So, that brings us to energy, which also brings us to international politics, and it ties into jobs, revenue to the government, debt reduction, and deficit reduction. You understand that debt, that's the cumulative effect of annual deficits, is money that the United States, each of us, owes. Take $17 trillion divided by 350 million people. If you have a family of 4, multiply that sum by 4. That's what you owe. That's just the primary debt. Now you can do the same exercise with the $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities, backed by the faith and credit of the United States. I mean, if that number doesn't catch your attention, I just don't know what will. Who do you think is going to pay it? You could tax all those millionaires and billionaires 100%, and they wouldn't even dent it. And as you've seen, those promises about if you make under $250,000, you won't pay one more dime, those were lies. Energy. Number one, if we're not dependent on foreign countries, we can save the $7 trillion that we've spent over the last 20 or 30 years trying to defend our oil interests in the Middle East. That kind of helps the debt and deficit, doesn't it? Has more money for the economy, spurs greater investment, increases revenues to the government. And because we're producing all that energy domestically, whether it's in Canada via the Keystone Pipeline, or whether offshore, I'll talk about that in a moment, or domestically here in the United States, that's American jobs. That's American manufacturing. It's American energy. We increase our national security and our individual security, at the same time creating employment, increased revenue, decreased debt for the government, and cheaper energy for all of us, which gives us more spending power, which means we spend more money, which means we create more jobs, which means we create more revenue to the government. Do you understand how interdependent all this stuff is? Let's take the Keystone Pipeline project. Now, Obama has fiddle-farted around with this for 3 years. The State Department recommends he does it. The EPA grudgingly can't find anything wrong with it. Yet still he doesn't do it. You know why? Let's go back to our 4 main causes of this mess: money and power. If Obama approves the Keystone Pipeline, he's not going to get those millions of dollars of campaign dollars from the Greenies. Now, what do you think he would do if he actually had to operate and get votes on the merit rather than having them bought for him? That's right. Let's say those Greenie outfits that each give $1 million, $2 million, whatever they give per year, are limited to $5,000. They don't seem to have that big a voice anymore, do they? They got the same voice as you and me. And that's the way it's supposed to be. So energy is a key. I've done previous shows on the fact that we are the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. Conversion to natural gas will happen. So long as our eyes and monies and wallets, which are limited right now, are not diverted to other nonsense, like crony paybacks in failed solar companies, loans to companies that are already bankrupt, loans to overseas companies that do nothing for American jobs, and I can go on and on. And trade with China? Oh, come on. I mean, I can't even believe what stuff we do there. Do you realize that we actually gave China $150 million in foreign aid last year? Do you realize that we could save between $20 and $40 billion a year by greatly curtailing our foreign aid? Like, let's give foreign aid to our friends, not to our enemies. Haven't we learned by now that trying to buy a peace only prolongs the instability and results in an even bigger war? Let me give you an example. So, Linda Pullman, she's a Dutch journalist. She wrote The Crisis Caravan. Afghanistan, she called it. So, here's one example. This is a housing project in the Bamiyan province. The project starts with $150 million in donor funds. That was given to an aid agency in Geneva, which kept 20% for expenses. Yeah, right. And passed the contract on to a Washington, D.C.-based agency, which kept 20% for expenses, who then passed it on to a further contractor who kept 20% for expenses. What was left was passed on to an organization on the ground in Afghanistan. They purchased wooden beams from Iran. Say, what sanctions? What sanctions? They purchased wooden beams from Iran, and the haulage was provided by a trucking company owned by the governor of Bamiyan province. And they paid 5 times the normal trucking rate for the beams. It gets better, folks. When the beams got there, they realized that they were too heavy to be used with the loam-walled construction that's common to that area. So the wood was chopped up and used to fuel cook fires. I'm not making that up. You don't think there's some money savings out there? How come nobody's doing anything about it? Incompetence or intentional? What do you think? You understand that the trust in government, when we are continually lied to, when there's voter fraud out there, you guys have all heard about the Democratic congresswoman who actually voted in 2 states, Maryland and Florida. You've heard about the Democratic poll worker who voted 6 times. Listen, I'm sure there's abuses on the Republican side too. But the stories which seem to be cropping up, even in lamestream media, seem to be mostly Democrats. Let's put that aside. It doesn't matter whether you're Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, or Independent. If you vote more than once or you vote illegally, you've stolen somebody else's vote. And when you do that, one man, one vote, the fundamental essence of a representative republic is undermined. The faith in the system is fractured. When you have a government lying to you at the same time, whether it's about taxes or Obamacare or Benghazi or Fort Hood workplace violence, your faith in government is diminished. The fundamental foundation of your representative republic is fractured. Understand how important this is. You want to control voter fraud? Another simple solution. Class it into 2 separate acts. One is just an accident. You know, you went to the wrong precinct to vote. The clerk didn't ask for your picture ID. Yes, picture IDs have to be part of this, folks. Well, you both get slapped with a little fine, a slap on the wrist, and if you do it again, a year in jail. Okay? We'll turn the other cheek and say that was unintentional. You didn't vote more than once. You just voted in the wrong place. Everything else, you vote more than once, you vote in more than one state. They estimate 2.7 million people did that last election. That's more than the margin that Obama won by. 25 years in jail. No parole. No exceptions. 25 years mandatory. We'll see just how keen somebody is to cast that extra vote with that kind of sword of Damocles hanging over their head. Okay, we need to have a constitutional review board. And I don't mean appointed by the government, fox guarding the henhouse. I'm talking about a constitutional review board that can, prior to an executive order, prior to a stupid law, give a ruling on its constitutionality and its likely, should we say, demise or life if brought to the Supreme Court. Wouldn't that save a lot of court time, a lot of expense? Wouldn't that save a lot of angst with all sorts of weird executive orders and absolutely inane laws that are passed and signed? You bet. And here I am at the end of the show, I haven't even dented my solutions. We still have education to go through, foreign aid, North Korea and Iran. Let me tell you, Iran, let's take out their nuclear facilities. No more BS. There's only one way you know they won't have a nuke and they won't use it, and that's if they don't get a nuke. North Korea, you know, one of these days that saber rattling isn't going to be saber rattling. They're going to draw the sword, it's going to flash in the sunlight, and we're going to lose an American city. You can't tell me we don't have cruise missiles and other armaments which can take out their entire nuclear and rocket capability. Let's do it. What are they going to do about it? Not much. Oh, send their million-man army against the South? So, we do it so we're ready for it. Don't underestimate what technology can do to 1 million men all bunched in one place trying to cross a border. Let's end the threat. And the only way to end the threat is to end the threat. I'm not talking about nuking the people of North Korea or Iran. Those poor people don't know what's going on. They're brainwashed or silently resistant. I'm talking about taking out the capabilities that threaten us. All right. That's my thoughts for today. I'm going to continue this show in the future. We have some great interviews coming up. And in the meantime, if you like some of my ideas, talk to your friends about it. Write your congressman about it. Write your local representatives about it. Get the ball rolling. Maybe if we all put our shoulders to this collective wagon we call America, us, we are America. Maybe we can get that wagon kind of slowly moving uphill. But it's going to take all of us. It's way past the point where you can ignore it now, folks. Have a great Saturday. This is Reid Lance Rosenthal on the right side.
For more information about Reid and his work, please go to ontherightsideradio.com. There you can also click to purchase the first 2 volumes of his #1 best-selling historical Western series, Threads West, An American Saga, and Maps of Fate. And now the first volume of his new nonfiction series, Land for Love and Money, is available everywhere, or go to landforloveandmoney.com. That's Land for Love and Money. We'd also like to remind you that if you've missed any shows, you can go to the show archives on Reid's ontherightsideradio.com webpage. We look forward to seeing you again next week for another episode of Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side.